from, because you obviously, you would make the a judgment of where that entire surah or the vast majority of the verses are revealed from, and that's where the ruling comes from. Anyhow, point is, at the end of the day, it starts like a Mekki surah. Mekki surahs generally, Allah calls you out. Either you, people of Iman, or all of mankind. Calls you out. Now in this case, Allah said, O mankind. So now we're going to start to slowly dissect and delve into this particular surah, okay? Surah Nisaa is, as we mentioned to you, the 4th chapter of the Quran. One very quick point, it is called Surah Nisaa. What does Nisa mean? Women, of course. But it's specifically, linguistically, the word Nisa is actually talking about mature women. So if you talk about kids or men or women that have not reached the age of maturity, they carry different names. So just like we say Nisa is for the mature, Ar-Rijal for the mature, and these are plural, Rajul and Niswa. A mature man. Why is this surah called An-Nisa? Now make sure you note this. Why is this surah given this title? It doesn't talk about women and that's it, which a lot of people say. I couldn't tell you the amount of literature that's online, the amount of talks online that I found that a lot of these speakers or whoever they were, they literally said, this is called Surah An-Nisa because it's all about the women. It's their surah. That's technically not true. This surah is given its name actually because of one subject that appeared in that surah that never appeared in any others. Does anybody know what that subject is? Allah said this in Surah An-Nisa, وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ. And women get inheritance. They get a portion. That was a revolution that happened in the ummah. Never, ever, ever in the history of this ummah, and even pre-Islam, did women actually have the right to inherit. As a matter of fact, so women and even children as well. As a matter of fact, women themselves were the product of inheritance, right? So if a father had a daughter, and you raise that daughter, if he knew that, okay, you know, she's getting older, and he's getting weaker, and he's about to die, he puts in his will, not that, you know, he's left X amount of children. When it comes to his daughter, you know, this is a really terrible practice back in those days. He would actually write, I have a daughter, this is her age, this is when she was born, and I put a value on her that she is worth this amount of dollars. So that when he dies, this daughter could be sold off and the money that is received goes to the family that's left behind. So they were the product of inheritance themselves. Really awful practices. It goes even deeper than that. So this particular surah literally eradicated all of those practices. Now the women, not only did they get rights to inherit, they also had rights in other areas as well, in relationships, in communities, in marriages, and so on. We're going to come to, insha'Allah ta'ala, the verse about the mahar. I think it's the second or the third verse. So when we get to that, we're going to pause there for a bit and talk a little bit about what exactly this mahar is and why it's so important in this particular surah. Okay, so let's move on. If you were to summarize all of the subjects and themes of this surah, it's the last sentence at the bottom there. Social morals and ethics, society principles in Islam. It's all about how to build or reform a community. You know, I always say that this surah is the kind of surah that you should not be able to be part of an administration that serves a community except that you go through the surah first. That's for you to qualify that, okay, you're part of the admin. You need to go through this entire surah. This surah has all the ingredients to build a strong community. So we're going to see that right now in the very first verse. Let's go into the verse now. Allah Azza wa Jal says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind. So we obviously know that Allah is talking to Muslim and non-Muslim, right? That's really important, because that tells you whatever is in this passage of the Quran is not just for the believer. You can take this passage now and you can share it and you can teach it and you can implement it for the entire world, everyone to see and everyone to learn. So if you ever are one of those people that spends a lot of time talking and having conversations with people and colleagues and students and so on, make a note, this is one verse you want to be part of that conversation, okay? Here's the thing. Look at the first order or command that's given to us, or to mankind. Allah says, O mankind, Ya ayyuhan nas. By the way, nas is the plural. Ins, what does that mean? Humans, people. Nas also comes from the word nasiya, which means to forget. Why are we called that? We are called the creation that forgets. Because that's exactly what we do. We forget everything, every day of our lives. That's why we need alarm clocks. We need to write things down. We need people to remind us. Believe it or not, it happens to me all the time. Even this class, sometimes I forget I have to be here. Because, you know, every day you're with something and, oh wait, I have class this week. And you get yourself ready. So we need reminders all the time. How Quran helps you and I with that. So although we are the creation that by default, we are the creation that forgets. And we constantly forget. Allah gave us a secret ingredient to counter that. Does anybody know what that is? So we are a nation, we are a creation that is built and designed to forget. Then Allah tells us the way that you can counter that, meaning you can live a very intelligent, you can become an academic, you can be somebody that is, has strong memory. You can memorize the Quran, you can memorize your deen. The way to counter this is do what? It's just one thing in the entire Quran. Does anybody know what that is? You all know what it is. Dhikr of Allah. It's the remembrance of Allah. You constantly engage with anything that reminds you of Allah. You'll notice that you will forget that you are insun. You'll forget that. And Allah will help you develop a strong memory in anything. Some of the students, high school students, just finished up with their exams. So a lot of them, before their exams started, were asking, could you give us some advice how we could do well in our exams? It's a fair question. So after all the studying and all of that prep stuff is done, I told them to do one thing. I said, don't do anything else. Just do this one thing. And so college and uni students, same goes for you. One thing. Insha'Allah. Insha'Allah. After you've done all the studying and prep, you will do well. Just say Bismillah before you begin. Say it to yourself. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us that keep your tongue moist with the remembrance of Allah. And then another hadith starts adding to that. That every footstep you take, Bismillah follows you. Say Bismillah before you begin anything. The Prophet ﷺ didn't say, oh, by the way, it's just for Islamic stuff. You say Bismillah for anything and everything you do in your life. So when you're really sitting in that exam room and you're just about to begin, just and go for it. And most of the students who do this, I try my best to follow up with some of them, and they all have great stories about it. Again, we are the ones, as a Muslim culture, we don't know how to use this stuff. You have to spend your whole life engrossed into this knowledge to really understand how to make it work for you. So, Ya ayyuhan nas, all of mankind, ittaqu rabbakum. So here's the second point. Now, we're going to spend some time on this verse because this one verse is the introduction to the whole surah. This one verse has got a little bit of everything you need to step into every subject of this surah. So this is the most important verse in all of Surah Nisaa. So make sure you understand this surah really well. Okay? Allah says, have taqwa of your master. Ittaqu rabbakum, right? When Allah talks about creation from one single person, it's usually has implications on society. When Allah says, "O mankind, have taqwa of your master," here's the first ingredient in building a successful community. Have taqwa of your master, it shows that mankind's first connection is with Allah. So your first point, the one thing that brings all of us together as a community is what? Is taqwa. Now, how does that translate when you're dealing with people outside of Islam? How does that translate? It's really simple, and you are all doing it already. Everybody here, we have kind of like a general understanding and level of etiquettes that we deal with people. We're kind, good morning, thank you, go ahead, I'll hold the door for you. You know, we do these little things that at the end of the day, we don't cause any trouble, we don't create any animosity or hate, we don't do any of that, we just follow the rules, we follow the laws, and we mind our business, but we're kind to people. All of that is called taqwa. This is one of the most comprehensive subjects of the entire Quran, taqwa. It's talked about over 500 times in the Quran in different ways. So this one here, in this particular surah, that's the attitude that Allah wants us to start off with. Okay, so the attitude that we start off with is we have consciousness of Allah. So everybody's on the same page of what taqwa means? It comes from the word wiqayatun. Wiqayatun means that you are constantly thinking and remembering Allah. Everything you do in your day and night, in your entire life with anyone, you're doing it with this level of consciousness that Allah is watching you, seeing you, monitoring you, knows what you're doing. You know, if you, subhanAllah, man, you know, if we all as Muslims live that way, do you know how many problems we would solve without even saying a word? A lot of problems will just disappear and solve themselves. Because we would learn how to forgive and forget. And even if we didn't want to forget, we'd learn how to forgive. And even if we didn't know how to forgive or didn't want to forgive, we'd find a common understanding. How to move on. Because why? Each of us have a little bit of taqwa in us. Now put it in context. Can you imagine people who are in charge of communities and serve communities? If each of them remembered, and this was the driving principle for them to do their jobs, can you imagine how all of our masajids would look like? All of our institutes, all of our schools, all of our companies, everything would run to a standard that is more or less just right. It's fair and just for everyone. So, first ingredient to building a strong community is what? Everybody has to have a connection with Allah, that they are conscious of Him. He's always there. Okay, we move on. اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة. So here's the second ingredient, how to build a strong community. Now, by the way, if you're not part of any leadership program, and you don't actually serve a community, that's not true. Because maybe your community is your family, your home. That's your community. So you have to be, aware of that, and that's a massive responsibility. A community is only as strong as the families that build that community, right? So you do have a responsibility to ensure that taqwa is preserved and protected in the family. الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة. Okay. Here's the second point. Let's just say you don't think about taqwa, or you forget it, or you don't really understand what it is. Then what do? You remind yourself that at the end of the day, we all have one Father. We all come from the same person. That's the first check mark there. or the second one of the first things Islam came and destroyed was racism. And it's one of the biggest problems here, mentioned in this verse. It's one of the first things it eradicated. You know, this is a tough pill to swallow. I argue till this day, and by the way, I'm only talking within Muslims in general. This is one of the toughest pills to swallow. You know, we are really good at acknowledging all of the problems outside of our ummah, but internally, you know, we have our share of issues. You know, we have our share of cultural dilemmas and problems where we probably don't verbally say it, but we act like it. Again, when I say we, no one in particular, just generally speaking, I want you to think about a place that you walked into, a masjid or an institute or something, where the majority of that people belong to a different race or culture, and you were not part of that race or culture. How'd you feel when you walked into it? Think for a moment. As a matter of fact, ask yourself, when was the last time you ever did anything like that? Why? Ask yourself when you go into a place and you hear the announcements done in a different language. How encouraging is it for you to go back there again? Because why? You've been indirectly or culturally just singled out or shoved to a corner. That's not what Muslims are supposed to do. So internally, we have our share of issues under this subject. Now, let's reverse very quickly. How did the Prophet ﷺ deal with this? Well, do you notice that in the Quran, there are hardly any verses talking about racism? You can probably count them on one hand, just a few. And a couple of them might be in one surah, like Surah Al-Hujurat. لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم, right? You know, it'll be alluded to or indirectly talked about, but just it's scattered a few places here and there, and that's it. There's a wisdom behind that. There's a wisdom. You know, sometimes when you stop talking about something enough, what ends up happening? People forget about it. People forget about it. You know, and there was this one celebrity, I remember seeing this video online a long time ago. He was an African-American gentleman, and the interviewer was asking him, he's like, how do you feel about Black History Month? He said, I hate it. I hate it with a passion. So the interviewer was shocked. I was like, why? It's like, what religion are you? Or you're white. So do you want a White History Month? And then the interviewer said, no, I definitely don't want that. He said, me neither. So then the interviewer asked him, well, how do we stop racism? His answer was so simple and so profound. You decide what it means. All he said was, stop talking about it. Stop referring to people based on their color. And you'll see what happens. And I thought to myself, you know, when I watched that, and then I gave a few talks in the past on this subject, and I had a real difficult time finding verses that addressed it. And I thought to myself, maybe there was some truth in that man's answer. That Allah does not talk about colors and race much in the Quran. To indirectly teach you and I that when we see each other and when we interact with each other, we don't see color, we just see each other. That's it. Ya ayyuhan nas, ittaqu rabbakum. If you have a problem with that or you struggle with that, okay. الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة. He created you from the same anyway. Move on. وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما. And he drew out from that many men. So in other words, we multiplied, and women again have taqwa. بث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. واتقوا الله. So how many times were we ordered to have taqwa here? Twice, right? This is not as common as you think, that Allah gives you the same order twice or more in one ayah. That's rare in Quran, but it does happen in other places. Can anyone tell me what is the wisdom in that? I mean, we just read, have taqwa. We're concluding the verse, wattaqullah. What's the wisdom behind that? Is everybody here? Some of you look at me. Okay, so in case you missed the reminder at first, why did Allah say وَاتَّقُوا and He didn't say وَاتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمْ a second time? Why did He add His name in the second? You see that, right?
Shows more mercy.
Shows more mercy. Okay. Anything else? Think about this. If a parent tells their kid, make sure you go to bed at 9 p.m. Okay? 9 p.m. rolls around. He's still on Nintendo or still watching TV. Then the parent comes back the second time. Only this time, first it was dad, but now mom came in. Didn't daddy tell you to go to bed at 9? Same command or same instruction, but only this time, the mom added who? The name of the father. So didn't daddy say so? I saw daddy came and he told you this. It just sounds a bit more profound. It sounds like, I don't want to say it sounds a bit more frightening, because that's not the intent of the verse. So you're right when you say, if in case you missed it the first time, but there's more to it than that. It's not just about the command anymore. Hey, if you forgot taqwa in the beginning of this ayah, well, I'm going to tell you taqwa again, but also I'm going to put my name. Because when you remember me, if you forget taqwa, then just don't forget me. The source of it all. See how beautiful that is? This is what I like to call the psychology of Quran. Like if you sit there and you really reflect and monitor the wording of verses, wallahi, you will never pass that verse unless you find something incredibly amazing. So Allah adds His name to the second order so that, okay, you're already forgetting this stuff. Don't forget me. My name is here now. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. This is really interesting. Then Allah says, with what you ask for and al-arham. Why is this verse restricted to people who ask? Everybody, They're asking in the?
People got to remind the other person when they're asking for their rights in the name of Allah.
Okay.
Remind them of their accountability.
Okay, so to remind each other about accountability, that when you ask of and you talk about Allah, so in context, during the time of our Prophet ﷺ, there were many people, especially in Medina, many different tribes that used to come and insult him and used to talk about this Allah figure that he believed in and that he worshipped. And this ayah was an introductory response to that. That if you did not know how to debate your issues, or you weren't fluent in the subject at hand, which we're going to see in a moment, the surah is going to get really specific about certain things. If you're not accustomed to it or you don't know the background of that stuff, this ayah is also saying, whatever it is that they're asking you about, if you don't have the answer, at least respond to them. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينُ. Hey, at the end of the day, look, you got your way, but this is my deen. At the end of the day, yeah, it might be complicated. You probably don't understand it. Actually, I don't understand it as well, but I submit to it. Because Allah tells me, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. You see, some things don't get into it, even if you know. What this first verse is teaching you and I is there are foundational principles that have to be intact before you start building a community and before you start building relationships, friendships. There has to be an asas, we call it in Arabic. You've got to have some common understanding. So the common understanding in this verse is, make sure that you're all at least connected to Him in some way. So, الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. This I was really surprised about. Where did this come from? So we're talking about everything in general, all of mankind, all people. Then we're talking about the people who come and question you about your deen. Then all of a sudden, and family, relatives, and make sure that that's all intact as well. Whoa. So here you are talking to the Muslim or talking to the world about your deen and about Allah. Then all of a sudden, hey, also your family, your aunts and uncles, those really annoying ones that all of us have in our families. Yeah, make sure you keep a good relationship with everybody. Where'd this come from? What's the wisdom here? What do you see when you see that? Wal arham, silatul rahim, keeping close ties and good family relationships. Where does that fit? Like, how does that fit in everything that we've just looked at? If you can understand this, then you'll be able to respond to many critics of the Quran that say things like, Quran is just, a lot of your verses are just mumbo jumbo, just random talk. I mean, here we're talking about this isn't a families. Who was talking about that? We're talking to all of mankind. Why bring in families? Why make it so personal? What's the wisdom behind that? اتقوا رب الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. The wisdom, brothers and sisters, students, is that you will have a difficult time trying to relate taqwa to people. And if you do, you also struggle the same thing with family. You know, there are lots of Muslim families out there that are practicing families. They adhere to their deen. They take it seriously. Except that one son. He went to Mars somewhere. Except that one cousin. I don't want my kids near that one cousin. It's a bad influence on my kids. Except that one uncle that just never knows how to do any business transaction in a halal way. You know, we all have one of those. And so this verse is telling you, if you fail at everything out there, it brings you back to what? Your family. Don't fail here. Don't lose sight of that. All too often, people get engrossed, Muslims get engrossed in giving da'wah to everyone else. Except who? Sometimes the family is like at the bottom of that list. You're spending your time teaching the world the deen. Allah said in another surah, وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. It's a dua that believers are making, especially here in this context, in this particular verse in Surah Al-Furqan. It's actually the husbands that are saying this. Make me of the muttaqi that is an imam. An imam where? It's one of the names of husbands in the Quran, by the way. Allah calls them an imam. Where? When it's time for them to preserve and protect taqwa in the family. It's the man's job. When I say it's the man's job, he takes the leading role in ensuring that Islam is preserved and protected in his home. He takes that leading role. When he gets weak, he needs to figure a way out to get himself strong again. We're going to come to that as well. We hopefully will get to it today, where we have a section about, we're going to get into a little bit of marriage. And what you're going to see about the surah, it may shock you. So with that being said, last point, we move on. Then Allah concludes and He says, indeed Allah has always had His hand on your neck. What does that mean? It comes from the word raqib. Inna Allah kana alaykum raqiba. Allah has always had His hand around your neck. Raqib from raqaba, it means to grab like a sheep or a goat by the neck and you force it to go where you want it to go. You ever see some people, they do that? Like if you watch any videos or anything, sometimes the farmer grabs the sheep by the neck and steers it. We are all under that control with Allah. He has that level of control over His creation. And as a matter of fact, I added it there. Imam al-Qurtubi goes into a whole discussion about Allah. One of His names is, He is Ar-Raqib, the all-watchful. How does that translate as one of His names? When Allah says that He is Ar-Raqib, think of it as like there is 24-hour a day surveillance in the sky. And it's not just He's watching over you. He's very watchful. It's the surveillance system that never turns off, never needs a break. He's watching you when you're sleeping. And he's monitoring and calculating everything that you do. Everything's being put together on a scale. Nothing is left out. Ar-Raqib, what it does at the end of the day, so here's the benefit that I hope you can receive from this. On the one hand, especially young people, they get really terrified when they hear stuff like that. But on the other hand, I always like to think that this is actually one of the greatest blessings I could ever ask for. That I have a creator that never ever takes his eyes off of me. He's always mindful of what I do. So when people forget me, then I know he doesn't forget me. When people stop helping me, I know he won't stop helping me. He will always be there. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah said one of the most beautiful statements I've ever heard in my life of any scholar. So if you want to note that, it's really, really absolutely beautiful. I quote it a lot, so some of you might have heard it before. He said that when people abandon you in times of need, in times of hardship, he said, count that as a blessing because it's Allah's way of showing you that He will solve your problems all by Himself. Let me say it again. When people leave you in times of need, they abandon you, that's Allah's way of teaching you and saying to you, I will take care of you myself. It almost creates like this beautiful, private relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what you get from Ar-Raqib. So it's actually supposed to draw you in closer to Him. Okay? Keeping strong ties with family is considered to be one of the top 5 greatest and most blessed ways of guaranteeing yourself Jannah. If there ever was a way. If there was ever something that you could do, and if you did it well, the end is nothing but Jannah, this would be one of them, is keeping family ties. Now that's easier said than done, right? It's easier said than done. Even if your family isn't Muslim, still have an obligation to keep at least good ties, a good relationship overall. Like my in-laws, none of them are Muslim. But we have a great relationship. And we have a great understanding. So, it can be done. How you do that, and what are some of the strategies that you can use to achieve that, it varies with family to family, right? So you have to, when you look at this verse, note immediately that keeping family ties is probably just as important or maybe even more important than giving da'wah to the entire world. Before you call others to the right path, you call your family and encourage them. That's really hard. Like, I'm not going to butter this up in any way. It's an extremely difficult thing, especially in this time and age that we live in. A lot of the morals and ethics and mannerisms that we all grew up with in terms of how families live and interact with each other, a lot of it is lost. All those simple things that we all used to do back home when you were kids, it's gone. You would live and die for your brother, no matter how annoying he is. Maybe you get into a fight here and there, but you'd work things out. Your parents, they never had to repeat themselves to you. All of this stuff is almost impossible to find. Now, it's the hardest thing to teach young people. Your mom, dad, yeah, I know they don't speak English, but you gotta just stay quiet and figure them out. You can't call them names. Just because you have a degree, you don't get to act like you're better. You have to bring yourself to their level or even below. It's Allah's words, by the way. وَاخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ. Lower your wings of humility to them, out of mercy towards them. If they never went to school and you have like 12 degrees, it means nothing. Allah says, put yourself at their level or even below. Stop using big words with them to show that you know stuff. Speak in simpler languages. How I learned this is I watched some of the ulama do this with their mothers. You know the great scholar who's still alive today, Sheikh Mukhtar al-Shinqiti, Hafidhahullah, he's one of the faqih of Medina. Teaches in both the Haram in Medina and Mecca, right? And he has one of the biggest lecture sessions probably in the world. If you go to one of his lectures, there are at least maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people sitting there every day. So one day he was giving a story about his mom who passed away. And he said that one day he was talking to his students, and students, when they come and see him, they kiss him and they hug him, and they're just, literally, this is the man. If you get one sentence out of him, it could guide you for the rest of your life. Like, that's how profound his knowledge is. And his mom was there. So he stood up and he started answering some questions, and his mom interrupted and said, straighten your back. Because the sheikh was just like this, straighten your back. The students are the ones that really wrote about this. And they said the sheikh did not even look at his mom. He just obeyed her, straightened his back. Then he continued. About an hour went by, mom is still there. Okay, yakfi, enough, stop now. He looked at at that time there was probably about 100 students around him. Assalamu alaikum, I have to go now, done. Grabbed his mom's hand. Every time he tells the story, by the way, he never finishes it. He starts weeping in front of everyone. He could never finish this. And every time he talks about his mom, his father as well, it's so overwhelming with emotion that it's quite extraordinary to see that and witness that. These are the things you probably don't hear about anymore. Now we struggle just to have our kids listen to us when we tell them, could you please take out the garbage? Could you please just, I just want one cup of tea. You don't even have to put the tea bag. You just boil some water and I'll finish the rest. Please, I beg you. It's this transition. Point is, at the end of the day, our Prophet ﷺ told us about this, right? Some of these things will start to disappear. And when this happens, realize that the day of judgment is right around the corner. So all of this is captured through this one verse. That's our attitude going into Surah Nisaa now, okay? Inna Allaha kana alaykum raqiba. Allah can force you to where He wishes you to be. So in turn, we have control over nothing, even ourselves. Okay? Now it's going to start getting into some of the other subjects. And then Allah says, وَآتُوا الْيَتَامَى أَمْوَالَهُمْ وَلَا تَتَبَدَّلُوا الْخَبِيثَ بِالطَّيِّبِ وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَهُمْ إِلَىٰ أَمْوَالِكُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ حُوبًا كَبِيرًا. Okay. And give to the orphans. We all know what orphans are, right? Has anyone seen or been around orphans at all? Anyone here has interacted or been around orphans? 1, 2, 3, 4. Was it here in Canada or elsewhere? The only interaction I've ever had was I visited an orphanage in Medina. That was it. I've never met any orphans here or anywhere else. I want you to just observe how Allah talks about orphans in this surah. There are probably just over a dozen verses that address this subject. Allah says first and foremost, look at the attitude we were in verse 1. Look what Allah is taking us to next. And give to the orphans their property, their money. So we went from the whole world to the closest people near you. Who are we talking about now? Children without parents. So our next obligation towards society, towards community, is we look out for the overall well-being of whom? In this context, it's orphans. Just generalize that word for a minute. We're looking out for whom? Children. Children got the second verse of this surah. And it's going to continue. Not the leaders, not the scholars, not teachers. kids. And on top of that, kids with no parents. You know, back in the days, and actually even still some cultures today do this. It's really sad. But they treat orphans like subhuman. They're sort of kind of humans. They're not really. They're just whatever. Society didn't know what to do with it. They're kind of leftovers from families that nobody wants. So just shove them into a building and we'll figure it out. We'll start collecting donations. Somebody will start a campaign and a program and pay attention to them. Yeah, there are cultures that do this today. Allah says now, give them their properties. So obviously when their parents have passed, there is some money or wealth that's left behind. What happened back in those days is that you can see the first check mark. This verse was revealed speaking to the guardians and protectors of the orphans. So those who were in charge of them. So what they would do back in the days when this surah was being revealed is tribes and even leaders of those tribes will have a certain amount, X amount of orphans. But they would not use their pocket money to raise them and care for them. They would eventually get access to some of their property, some of the wealth that was left behind, right? What they used to do, however, is you'll see later on in the same verse in a minute, that they used to take their own money and property that probably wasn't as good, wasn't as rich or valuable, and exchange it. So in other words, if they came with, some beautiful clothing, real good quality clothing, you don't need that. Here, take this piece of cloth and just wrap yourself with it. It's good. And they'll keep the valuable stuff. That's what Allah is talking about when He says, give the orphans their properties and do not substitute the defective for the good. So, what is Allah doing here? He's looking out for children, and He's also protecting what of children? Their rights. Tell me, when was the last time you ever heard a sentence like that? We have to stand up and protect the rights of all children. Think about when was the last time you heard a sentence like that? Especially, again, in the Muslim world. Let's make sure that we don't forget what it looks like today. Today, young people in general, if they're lucky, they might make it on the list of priorities for a particular organization or institute or what have you. They might make it there. And if they do, it kind of looks like this. Yes, we need the youth to come to our masjid. You're here. There's a vacuum. There's a broom. We need volunteers to sweep up my office or something, just take care of this and that. We need the youth. Okay, fine, forget the chores. We need the youth to be part of the community. They're our future. We need somebody to teach them a program. Let's hire so-and-so. Okay, come on, you're hired. Your salary is going to be $5 an hour. We want you to teach for 7 hours a day. I know there's prep time, so whatever, 15 hours a day, whatever you need. But this is the community's money, it's barakah, blah, 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 blah. Go ahead, teach them. And poor teachers now stuck with maybe 45 young people, students, that no one even knows exists. Because that was the last interaction that they've ever had with anyone else. They've always been shoved to the corner. I did a survey, not once, a few times. I teach high school students, right? Right now, I teach about, I think it's 175, right? For 1 year. Split up in 3 places. Altogether, it's about 100. No, actually, it's more than that. It's just, I think it's probably over 200 now, right? Because one of the classes alone I have is 106. So I did this. I tried something. And I do this every year. I tell the students, I said, tell me 3 things that you want to see when you walk into a masjid. What's the 3 things that are most important to you when you walk in there? no matter what it was. Like some of them said things like, oh my God, I just want food. The other was like, I just want a gym. But all of them said, we just want a little bit of appreciation. Just a little bit of respect. That's all. And that really, really hit me hard. Look how Allah respects young people. He not only respects them, He stands up for them and protects their rights. If something belonged to them, He didn't even say, okay, all those who are in charge, when you get some time, or if you run out of your own wealth, make sure that you're fair. He jumped straight to the order, straight to the amr, and said, make sure what's theirs is theirs. Then on top of that, don't try to play any games with them. Just because they're young and have no one to stand up for them, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا. Remember the last sentence Allah left before He got into this ayah. I'm right behind you and I can hold you by your neck. So don't mess around. Then it continues. If you see this second check mark, this is one narration mentioned in Imam al-Qurtubi's tafsir. There was a rich man who gained some wealth from his brother's nephew who cared for an orphan, right? When the orphan matured, the son had asked this particular orphan for money. And his uncle said, don't. So this kid, his dad said, no, don't do that. Because when the Prophet ﷺ heard of this incident, that particular verse was revealed. And the uncle then said, I seek refuge from Allah. أعوذ بالله من حُوبًا كبيرا. حُوبًا كبيرا, everything that is forbidden intensely, and if you do it, then you deserve to be scolded. It has always been something that is detestable. So in other words, the thought of taking something from orphans that did not belong to you, Allah did not say it's wrong. He called it إِنَّهُ كَانَ حُوبًا كَبِيرًا. The end of this verse. That is ever a great sin. Do you see how, if those of you who don't know Arabic, look at the translation and then look at how حُوبًا كَبِيرًا really is. How much of what you saw at the bottom you got from that last sentence? Do you see what translation is? Just 1 or 2% of what the verse is really saying? Because it just looks like, oh, it's a big sin. Okay, don't do that. No. Actually, if you do take from their wealth unjustly and unfairly, to Allah, you deserve to be put on the spot. You deserve to get some kind of punishment, be reprimanded in some way, and even scolded. Why? Because that's what huban kabira is. Allah didn't say just huba. He added the word kabira. Even if you know a little bit of Arabic, what's kabira? Something that's great, that's massive, that's huge. You can't see the end of it. It almost sounds like if you were ever allowed to hold a grudge on someone, this is probably one of those places. That person there, yeah, he used to steal from kids. Watch out for him. It almost reaches that level. That person has become known. Huban kabira. It's a big deal to Allah. Okay? This is just the introduction now. The wealth of orphans can be used in two scenarios. So Imam al-Qurtubi talks a little bit about fiqh. We're not going to go into all of it, but just to give you some appreciation of what this subject is like. Because most of us in this part of the world probably won't study this stuff, just because we're not exposed to orphans as often as probably others in other parts of the world. So orphans can generally be used, their wealth can be used in two scenarios. Number one is to maintain the needs of the basic necessities, food, clothing, and everything else. Here's the condition, that's why I put it in bright yellow, this is the condition. If the guardian is unable to do this for him or herself. See that condition? So in other words, they have to be doing this on their own first. Does anybody know why? Because the kids, when they inherited this money from their parents, unless if it's stated in a will, that's not actually what the money is used for. It's not used for the basic necessities. The guardians are the ones that are responsible for that. Because why? They're kids. You don't tell kids, hey, listen, need you to start paying rent. I know you're 5, but that's what you need to do. You should go to the store and pick up your own clothing yourself as well. So that's why you do that. So that's why he or she becomes responsible. If they're struggling, of course. And look at the other condition. And use only what is necessary. So you can't say, okay, well, we've got 2 orphans in the house. I've got 1 kid, so now it's 5 of us. I'm gonna need a van. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna need a bus. And it's not gonna be any bus. I'm gonna buy like a Mercedes. Can't do that. So only what is necessary. These examples might sound a bit far-fetched, but if you really think about them, oh, you need a phone? Okay. Let's just wait until the iPhone 20 comes out and that's yours. You know what? Let me see if I can get it today. Just got to pay a little extra. We'll use all of your inheritance, but we'll get it for you. You don't get to do that. Strict rules for orphans and how you spend their wealth in Quran. This is not just about responsibility. It goes back to the same ayah. This is Allah protecting the wealth of people who can't protect anything because they're just kids. Okay? Or give all the wealth to the orphan once they've matured enough and become responsible. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he is of the opinion that you become responsible, you can have money of your own when you hit around 25 years. Then you can, have your own bank account and do your own thing. That's Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. This is why in these days, like if you go to open an account, if a kid is below a certain age, what do they need? Someone to co-sign. They need a guardian. So some of these principles are actually implemented in our system today. We're going to talk more about kids and money in the next verse. Before Islam, no inheritance was given to women and children. Still, the Meccans took large sums of inheritance. How? They traded whatever they had for something better or more valuable, which we've talked about. They believed a head for a head, meaning you're an orphan and so was I. They cared nothing about the justice in the transaction. So in other words, when they had an orphan in front of them, he's a tribal leader. He said to that orphan, well, when I was your age, I was also an orphan. So you get the same treatment that I get. When I was your age, I ate only bread. That's it. You're going to get that. So when you're done, you can join us at the table there when we're slaughtering a goat or something and we're having a nice feast. You don't get to do that. This was actually, as silly and crazy as that sounds, that was actually the practice back in those days. And I wouldn't be surprised if that still happens today. So it's not just about money anymore. What is this really about? Traditions, culture, heritage, all of these things have to synchronize in a principle of just and fairness for both the orphan and the family or the people that care for them. Really, really important. Okay. Before we get to this, Aisha radiallahu anha, an orphan. So there was a lady and she had this little young girl with her. And they came at the door of Aisha radiallahu anha. The Prophet ﷺ had left. He wasn't home at that time. So they were beggars. And you know how beggars are, right? At least in that part of the world. As long as they can find a kid, even if it's not their own. Look, I got a kid. Oh, start crying, please, cry. Look, he's crying. So Aisha radiallahu anha, what did she do? She went and she got the last piece of date that they had in the home. She broke it in half and she gave it to them. She also found a piece of bread and she gave that away as well. Now the house has nothing. They were happy and they left. The Prophet ﷺ eventually comes home. He's asking Aisha radiallahu anha, do we have anything? So he asked her, do we have anything in the oven? Okay, so in those pits where they used to cook things, do we have anything in there? She said, no, Ya Rasulullah. As a matter of fact, I gave away the last of what we had to these 2 that came to our home. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, and he quoted this particular verse that when you have children in the picture who may or may not have parents, even if the guardians are there, that's enough. He said, in other words, he's saying to her, you gave it to him, that's fine. You will see the result of that investment in your akhirah. He actually praised Aisha radiallahu anha for doing that. Why? Because there was a kid in the picture. And it looked like this kid did not have parents with her. So that was okay. It's a long hadith. It's narrated in Bukhari. It's a very famous hadith. Point is when it came to orphans, the Prophet ﷺ never asked any questions, even if he was down to his last bit. So, last thing is huban, refers to a camel hump. It is one of the names of sins. Why? One of the names of sins in the Quran, huba. Why? Because that's what sins do. If you don't address them, what do they end up doing? They end up becoming a huge and massive burden in your life. You know, it kind of looks like, man, I said the word again. Oh my God. Oh, I looked at the same thing again. I did the same thing again. So before, it might have been okay, it's just once or twice, but now it's become a habit. And it's really bugging you. It's really affecting the way you deal with people, the way you deal with yourself and your family. That's called huba. So these are like the after effects of sins, if they're not addressed. Prophet ﷺ used to make dua to Allah, Allahumma ghfir hawbati. He used to ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive him of this kind of sin. The kind of sin that goes unnoticed and it continues to pile and pile and pile. You ever notice that? You know, somebody might come and tell you, listen man, you got like a real attitude. And you look at them and you're like, are you serious? Me? I had never thought, yeah, you have an attitude since the day I met you. What's the attitude? You're stubborn. No, I'm not. Get out of here. See? Sometimes we have habits. Others need to call it out to us. Because if it's let go, it ends up looking like this. Does anybody know, or at least tell me, why this is a problem? Why don't you want... What's the problem if these sins pile up? Because forgiveness is always there. As long as you're here, you ask Allah to repent, for repentance and forgiveness, then inshallah it should be okay. So what's the big deal? Why specify this particular problem with sins that they pile? What's the wisdom behind us knowing that? Think of it this way. If you took a handful of dirt and threw it on your driveway every day, what will eventually happen to that pile of dirt? It'll get so big that it'll start to do what? It'll start to create a problem with your car getting in and out, people walking in and out. Then ants would look at it and be like, wow, we've got an amazing spot here. So they'll start infesting it. It'll create one problem after another. That's why huba is a problem. If you leave a sin to carry on because the person decides to trivialize it, or it's not a big deal, or it just happened once, this is why the Prophet ﷺ made a dua against this, to protect him and forgive him of that. These are the kinds of sins that you don't realize, but everyone else sees it in you. So you ask Allah to forgive you from that. Because someone could have that pile getting bigger and bigger in their heart, and they just don't see it that way. Right? Number 3. Allah continues and He says, how are we doing? Ya Allah. I'm just getting warmed up here, man. Okay. Students, how are we doing? Does anybody have any questions before we continue?
I just wanted to add,
Sure.
when you are talking about orphans, the general definition that we take in societies today is without parents. But Islamically, isn't it the child who doesn't have a father?
When we're talking about orphans, yes. So our Prophet ﷺ defined it this way. But, you know, we don't want to get into the details of how this is. What I wanted is that if you notice this verse, it's very generic in the way it's addressing the subject. It will get into more detail somewhere in the middle of the surah. So what I want everyone to just kind of see for a moment is just to kind of appreciate a big picture here. We're going to come to a section of the surah where Allah will talk about if you do happen to consume the wealth of this orphan, what's going to happen? And when that happens, that's where this conversation gets introduced now. Exactly who gets punished for taking the wealth of that orphan? And who gets the reward? So in this case, you're going to start to see there's more commentary coming of Imam al-Qurtubi defining exactly what is a yatim. Okay, so we'll come to that. I didn't want to introduce that yet. Is that okay? Of what exactly is a yatim and how that's defined in Arabic language. We're not going to get there yet. Okay, so just roll with this surah for now, because we're still at the introductory points of some of these themes. Is that okay? I'm just one of those teachers. I'm very meticulous about jumping ahead, because even for me, I get really confused myself when I'm teaching it even, right? So this particular verse, verse number 3, continues with the same subject. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى. So if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan girls, in this particular case, then marry those that please you of other women. Okay. Everybody knows what this verse is, right? Look at the first check mark. It's the ayah of polygamy, right? For some cultures and so on, that's the only ayah that some people memorize in the whole Quran, right? It's unfortunate, but this is one of the verses that I like to think is one of the most abused verses of the Quran, right? We're not going to talk about polygamy, but obviously you can see that many circles around the world have devoted discussions to either eliminate or reform this particular practice. I've put some notes there that you can take a look at, right? If this happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it means that it was a norm back then. And generally speaking, that principle can apply to wherever this practice is happening. But here's what I want you to note. Remember this principle that scholars of usul teach us. Every time you come across a subject in our deen that has multiple opinions to it that are valid opinions, so there's more than one way to achieve that thing. Whenever that happens, this is your first indication that you have a choice whether to practice this or not. Or you have a certain extent that you can go and you don't have to go beyond that. So in other words, if you apply that principle to this subject, we don't have a single ayah or hadith commanding men to do this, right? We don't have a single ayah or hadith. This ayah has a context to it, which I'll get to you in a minute, right? The fact of the matter is that most of the ummah doesn't have this practice. And we're not going to say, well, because most of us are not doing, let's just eliminate it. Because we can't do that either. It is in the Quran. However, what's also in this same surah is Allah says, أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. It's in the same surah, right? Obey Allah, obey His Messenger, also obey the leaders of your country. Now, you take that order now, and you can easily apply it, especially to practices like this, where you have choice in it. So, let me ask you, if you take that order, obey Allah, obey His Messenger, and leadership, how does this practice look right now? It's not applicable. Can't practice this. Even Islamically, you can't do that, at least where we are. You understand? And it doesn't mean that you're rejecting the idea, okay, verse number 3, I've rejected that. No. What you're saying is that the subject has given that the opportunity to make that choice. It's not a closed subject. You either do it or you don't. If someone does decide to follow through this, they will still be sinful in the sight of Allah, doing it in a place where it wasn't allowed. You understand? Because I hear this conversation all the time. Oh, it's in the Quran. Who no one can say anything out of the Quran. Well, this is the practice, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But it wasn't wajib. It's not ordered to us to do it. So we accept it as a verse of the Quran. We accept that. It's there. But we also have to be very aware and mindful that there are verses in this exact same surah that are very strict, explicit verses talking to you about the laws. Even talking about culture and tradition. All of those factors play a role in making decisions like this. Now, when it comes to things where we can't compromise. So for example, let's say like prayer. Suppose there was a law that said, okay, you can't go and pray 5 times a day no more. That's a different story. Because now that's a direct amr, an order in the Quran. That's your whole purpose and identity. So if you're restricted to do that, which some countries in the world are, by the way, right? If that's the case, now you have some decisions to think about. Okay, do I go somewhere else? How do I do this? So just keep this principle in mind because it solves a lot of these problems. Whenever you come across a subject that has a difference of opinion in it, that's your first clue that you have to be wise and make a choice of what is most feasible in the culture and society and land that you live in. That's the blessing. I argue that this is what the Prophet ﷺ meant when he said, al-ikhtilafu rahma. Even though it's a da'if hadith, that difference of opinion is a mercy. The wisdom in it is quite interesting. So when you have the opportunity to make different decisions, it's almost, oh, this is a blessing in by itself because I can make the decision here and still respect the order, respect the knowledge and the theory of the Quran and the Sunnah. Like you could still preserve all of that. Anyhow, my point is this. If you look for, continue reading 2, 3, or 4, in terms of those numbers, anybody who goes beyond that, some of the ulama argue they're not even Muslim anymore. Because you're basically saying, oh Allah, you didn't give me enough. That's pretty much what they're saying. Unfortunately, the people who do fall into this, vast majority of them do not know how to uphold the rights and keep this a civilized, unit or relationship or marriage. So it's really this one ayah. I have seen ulama write volumes on this one ayah, literally volumes. But if you fear that you will not be just, then only one, marry one, or those your right hand possesses. That subject is coming in an ayah by itself, so we're going to go into detail of what your right hand possesses really is. What's that talking about? That is more suitable that you may not incline. So, in other words, there's a couple things that you want to keep in mind with this particular verse. Marriage in Islam is a means of offering women wilaya. Wilaya meaning what? Protection, stability, security. So, for the husbands and brothers, this is one of the surahs that's going to really put your role and responsibilities in a marriage. It's going to really speak loud and clear to us. What exactly do you have to do? What are your primary roles in that kind of relationship? This is one of them. You are wilaya. So this wilaya is a transfer of responsibilities from the original mawla or wali, the father. That's what marriage is. So the father is giving his responsibility and saying to the son-in-law, you are now, I'm going to pass the torch on to you. That's what that transaction is all about. It's not, okay, she's no longer my daughter, assalamu alaikum. Right? Cultures do that. Cultures are the ones that mess that up. It's not. Hey, she's still your girl. Still your daughter. As a matter of fact, there was a time when the Prophet ﷺ was approached by a father. He married off his daughter to somebody, and that husband started beating her, abusing her. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, faqad farrashtuha. I gave her the red carpet when she was with me. Think about how real this hadith is, okay? I gave her the red carpet. And when she married this man, he hit her. And the Prophet ﷺ looked at the man, the father. You know what he did? He didn't say, okay, let's just wait and see where this goes. He didn't say, go tell her to be patient. He didn't say, okay, we need counselors. You know what he did? He told the father, let's go and break this relationship and separate the two of them without hesitation. He didn't ask about nothing. What does that tell you how the Prophet ﷺ approached this kind of abuse? Zero tolerance. Remember this statement, there is no patience for abuse in our deen. There's no patience. If you decide to take on that, that's your choice, and there's a tremendous reward for that. But remember again that nowhere in our deen told you to do that. Last point and we're done. A brief overview of shared rights and responsibilities between the husband and wife. So, because now this verse introduced some of these things, when you're doing a thematic study, you need to get a good, clear picture of the subject itself. So it already started to introduce about caring and protecting the spouse. So what I've done is, I've just extracted some of these shared rights because why? The subject is massive. I think even that the subject of rights and responsibility has to be rewritten all over again to incorporate a lot of the struggles and a lot of the cultural taboos and societal issues. All of that have to be incorporated. If you look at how scholars talked about these subjects, you know what they did? And jazahumullahu khairan, like it worked for hundreds of years, where they would say the right, and this is the hadith, this is the ayah, next. No exceptions. Now you can't do that. Now you need more. When I say more, not evidence, you need more explanation of exactly what does that mean. Respect him? What are you really saying? Protect her? I mean, like, I have to buy everything? Her cell phone bill too? I gotta pay for that? Yeah. She wanted the whole full internet package. Yeah, pay for it. Yeah. It's all in this now. So these are the shared responsibilities. Support and encouragement. Just like how they say, they usually say behind every great man, but apparently that saying is expired now. It's been abrogated. Now we're at beside every great man. There's always a great woman. Where do we get this from? Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahun. Right? She's a garment for you, you are a garment for her. You know what I love about that verse is how it began. Hunna libasul lakum. She's a garment for him. Started off with who? What does that tell you, the sisters, and especially those of you who are married? If you don't know it already, you have incredible effect on the marriage. You can do a lot just by presence alone. You know, when he comes home and he's got the most miserable day, but you're welcoming him home, or you're just at home, you got home early and you're all calm, relaxed, and you got some rest, the kids are asleep. That can literally take that whole stressful day and throw it out the window. And that's how the Prophet ﷺ taught his wives. This is the kind of relationship. You're a supportive cast to one another. And even sometimes, I heard one expert online, this gentleman, I forget his name, lives in Los Angeles. He's got a lot of interesting videos about how to develop strong communication and things like that. And one of the things he said is like, it's almost as if you're waiting for him to just quote the ayah, the way he's saying this stuff. He's like, she didn't fall in love with you because you bought her stuff. She fell in love with you is because the first thing you woke up, before you checked your phone, you checked her. Before you made your own breakfast, you made sure that hers was ready too. Like he was trying to give this this perspective that it's not just you. It's both of you. You look out for one another. So our deen is really explicit about this stuff. Protecting each other's secrets and intimacies. That's a separate category by itself. We have several hadith of our Prophet ﷺ. As a matter of fact, there is a verse in Surah Nisaa that talks about this particular subject, that when a couple divorces, obviously they shared certain things that they should never ever utter to anyone again. Okay? So even pre-divorce, the marriage itself, there are certain conversations you just don't have. You never talk about it with anyone, not even your own sibling, nothing. There's certain level of protection that must always be standard in the marriage. So you do that for one another. So just so we're clear, like if there's a particular scar somewhere, or if there's a particular ailment or issue or something, don't talk about it, right? Especially when no one else knows and sees that, then you shouldn't talk about it either. Strong communication about each other and your whereabouts. Islam is very clear about this as well. You want to go somewhere? Make sure your spouse knows. That's just common sense. But, I've been in the marriage counselor seat for some time. I don't really do that anymore. I try not to do that anymore. It's hard. But it's amazing how many couples, like that third point, that's a big dilemma, a big problem. Lots of marriages have this problem. Where did he go? I don't know. He just stepped out. Before you know it, he's in New York. He's coming back tomorrow. You text him or text her, no response. Don't get to do that. As a matter of fact, some of the ulama count this as sinful. If he or she texted you, respond to it. You don't, and you're deliberately putting him or her through that whole mental stress, and wasawis starts popping. Where could he or she really be? What are they really doing? All of that could go back on that person's irresponsibility on this subject. The mahar, I have a whole section on this. So we're going to talk about what the mahar is, and of course, the men are the one that do that. Love, care, and compassion, very obvious. That's the whole purpose. I get that from وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. مَا قَالَ وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَهَا or بَيْنَهُ. Allah didn't say, I gave him or I gave her. What did he say? Kum, both of you. You both have to be loving and caring and compassionate. The Prophet ﷺ went into great detail of how to do that, by the way. If we get a chance, maybe we'll touch on a few of them. Financial support, accommodation, and protection, this is primarily from him. We're going to come to verse 34, the famous verse 34. Does anybody know what that verse is? You always find a student that knows it, right? الرجال قوامون على النساء. I'm not going to translate that for you yet. I will tell you, however, there are some really terrible translations out there. They sound like, men own women, men control women. قوامون, really awful translations. And so when we get to that verse, bi'idhnillah, we're going to spend some time and I'm going to really dissect every word of that verse so that you really truly understand that that verse is actually quite beautiful of the message within that verse, okay? Just and fairness. So the financial support, again, it's the husband's primary responsibility to take care of all the financial expenses. However, she is more than welcome and also in some cases encouraged that if she sees her husband struggling, that she, out of her own goodwill, good heart, it's her husband, it's not her friend, that she does what she can to help out and assist him, right? Just and fairness, that's in the next verse, by the way, and sharing the duties and responsibilities. I don't know if I should say what I want to say about this one. The Prophet ﷺ used to sit and stitch his own clothing. He used to sweep his house. This is the sunnah way of telling us guys, he did house chores as well. It's like, sometimes you do have to get the vacuum. Sometimes you do have to mop. Sometimes, and dare I say, you do have to cook. You do have to share some of those responsibilities. That's the sunnah way. However, to what extent, that is where that requires some time to talk about. Right? To what extent do you do all of this? Now I know, even if you're not married, a million questions will pop into your head about each of these, right? It's not our subject here. However, I am more than willing to entertain as much of it as I can, because again, this is a thematic study. We are going to skip chunks of verses here, because they'll all be talking about the same thing. So I will say to you, okay, from verse so-and-so, like 16, let's go on to verse 36. Because from 16 onwards, it's all about the munafiqeen. So we're going to chunk that and spend 2 or 3 classes on it. Done. Move on. That's how a thematic study is done, right? So with that being said, that brings us to verse number 4, which is where we will pause. This is the introduction to the mahar. And we're going to look at various fiqh issues that are related to the mahar itself, okay? What the mahar should be and how it should be presented, the wisdom behind it, etc. All the different characteristics of the mahar that you see there. All of the different characteristics of what a mahar should be. What qualifies as a mahar, what doesn't. What if you've been married for 25 years and you still never got your mahar? What if he passed away and he never fulfilled it? Oh yeah. This is where this conversation gets dirty, but in a good way. Okay? So with that being said, this is where we will pause, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. If you have any questions, by all means, just come and talk to me up here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.